Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that's been going through the Friday the 13th movies 13 minutes at a time. I'm your host, McGregor.
And I'm Bloody Brilliant Brian.
And I will dispense with the shitty Scottish accent, but this time we're going to be talking about the fan film Jason Lives Again from 2019. And I get the feeling that it was filmed closer to Old Jersey than New Jersey.
Yeah, we can get into that a little bit later. You'll start to hear this as we go on, but there's not a lot of background information about this movie out in the open. So some of it's speculation, but I do wonder. I personally don't think it's Scottish. I think it's more of a Yorkshire accent, but either way, it poses some problems as the movie goes on that we can get into a little bit later.
I mean, you've got a better ear for that kind of thing based on growing up over there. So yeah. I just did, for some reason, that's the one I could do. So I did that.
Let's just say rural United Kingdom.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is sort of the scenario that I anticipated and feared a little bit when we talked about the idea of covering fan films, which is, it's not particularly good, but I don't want to shit on it too hard because it was made with, it was made by fans. It was made with a lot of enthusiasm. They put their own resources behind it. I don't get the sense that they are full-time professional filmmakers. What I could find about this place is that it's a prop and mask house where they make their own stuff, and they've been doing some fan films here and there. So they're probably honing their filmmaking craft, but this is pretty amateur. It's pretty raw. But there are some things that I did like. So I mean, we're probably gonna make some fun of things, but hopefully not be too insulting because hey, we're fans too, and they made a movie. I haven't, so I it's a fine line we're gonna have to toe.
Right, and there's things that I have to say too, and I can't decide if I want to reveal those things now or just kind of let them happen organically throughout the conversation. But I agree with you. I don't even know if you've mentioned that we're covering Jason Lives Again.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I didn't hear that part. I was so aroused by your Scottish ish accent that I wasn't sure what I was hearing. But yeah, I mean, I guess I can reveal this part. Let me just say that 5 minutes in, I was a little worried, and I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have revealed to our audience what we were talking about before I had finished watching it. And then I will say that by the end, I was fine. I was like, okay, I'm good with this. So yeah, there's things that we're going to point out. I don't think it's going to be any kind of insult or overly critical, thoughts. It's just some ideas, but in the end, I'm totally fine that we ended up covering this.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, I'm trying to watch it and talk about it from the standpoint of understanding that their resources were limited and they could only work with what they could work with. So the fact that it's all shot in broad daylight and, they're basically on this lake in a housing, in a neighborhood practically. And, it's what you and I would have to do if we wanted to make one of these things too. So they do get some leeway in terms of their production value.
And that's where I think my opinion of it started to shift, because early on I was very early on, the first few minutes, I was focused on the low budget production quality and the fact that the acting wasn't that great. And then I was like, okay, well, that's not fair to criticize that. And then the reason why I was okay with it moving forward is because about 5 minutes in, I was like, they're just having fun. And I think they realize that there's not a lot of budget, and they realize that they're not great actors. They're just having fun. They had an idea and they're executing it. So I'm like, okay, and that's when I was fully on board with it. I'm just like, I'll go along with it. And sure, there's things that we'll point out and maybe even make fun of, but for the most part, I was like, it's hard to be critical of it, but I was a little concerned at the beginning, thinking, oh no, what have we gotten ourselves into?
Right. And I don't want to damn it with faint praise, but I will say that, my overall opinion of this movie is that, hey, they made a pretty coherent fan film. Like, I've seen big budget movies from established directors that make less sense than this. Like, so even though coherency shouldn't be a bar you have to clear with too much effort, like, this could have been way, way worse than it was. And I mean, good for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the goofy things about it are the things that I ended up enjoying the most about it.
Well, so we open up on a shot of Crystal Lake, which, as we discussed, kind of looks more like a big pond. It's wooded, but it's not surrounded by tall trees like we've seen in the official movies and stuff. It's more like reedy, and there's not like a sandy shore or anything like that. It's just kind of like almost like a duck pond.
Almost like a lock.
Oh, indeed. And as we said, it's pretty much exclusively shot in broad daylight. So there's not a lot of atmosphere to this movie, but again, that's okay. The one thing that we get right away that I didn't like the whole time we were watching this is how all of the music is officially, it's music from Part 6, both the score and the songs. And that, for some reason, that bothered me. I didn't care for that. I think I understand why they did it. And they seem to be fans of Part 6, even though this essentially replaces Part 6 and Part 5 in the continuity. But there are little nods here and there to Part 6 that, they wanted to use what they could and evoke what they could from that movie. But for some reason, just stealing the music, like, I don't know, that didn't work for me so well.
I had the same feeling. It was very distracting at first because I wasn't expecting to hear official music in this fan film. As the movie goes on, it's kind of funny because there's so much music, not just Harry Manfredi's score, but also songs from Part 6 and even a couple of the other movies that they use, like Alice Cooper. So like these are like legitimate releases, and in some cases even actual video footage from the movies. And I'm just like, wow, you can really steal whatever you want as long as you're not profiting from this. Well, right. I mean, I don't know if you can, but they did, and they seemingly have not gotten in trouble for it. But yeah, it was distracting because enough that like I recognized the opening theme enough to know like, oh, this is a theme from Friday the 13th, but I couldn't peg exactly what movie it was from. I couldn't even figure out what particular song it was. So it was like, well, is it like a remake of a song or is it just like in the tone of, or in the mood of, kind of like when you see those like karaoke versions where it's like it's kind of like the real version but it's not. And I'm like, no, this is 100% the actual music. And the other thing that was surprising is and I don't know about you, Greg, but when I went into this movie, for some reason in the back of my head I thought that this was a sequel to Jason Lives. And I think I was a little confused because another movie that we're going to talk about, or a fan film that we're going to talk about a little bit later, is a direct sequel to The New Blood. But for some reason, I just heard Jason Lives again and just assumed that this was going to be a sequel. And so it wasn't until early on that I realized it was basically a remake. And it's just kind of like their version of it, which I kind of like because I don't know. And again, we're still early in the fan film arena, so I don't know what we're going to be walking into. But this was not something that I was expecting to see in a fan film. I always just assumed it was going to be just taking characters from the movie and putting them in the woods and someone making their own original content. But the idea of actually creating a remake of one of the Friday the 13th movies, I'm like, not only is that kind of cool, but it's totally something I feel like you and I, Greg, would have done when we were growing up. Is like, oh, let's just remake Part 2 or Part 4 or something and just kind of like act out those scenes. And so that was another thing that kind of like settled me in, is once I realized what I was watching and I'm like, oh, this is just a remake. This isn't a sequel. Like it's not beat for beat, but they're taking kind of like the greatest hits from part 6 and they're like, we're going to do our own amateur version of this. And I'm like, all right, I'm on board with that.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. Right around the time they, as we'll get to, come upon Jason's gravesite, I'm like, oh, what they're doing is replacing parts 5 and 6 and everything that came after that. So they've created like their own, parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, and now this as its own timeline. And it was. I was fine with that. I don't know that it's necessarily the most creative result that they could have done, but hey, that's fine. Like you said, they had a good time, and they did some things that I did like. So yeah. We've established the lake, and then we get a shot of a Camp Crystal Lake sign nailed to a tree. So confirming that we're back on familiar territory. Although it's not a sign that evokes. I don't remember seeing that kind of Crystal Lake sign anywhere else in the movies.
No, it's a very primitive sign that's just kind of like nailed high up on a tree, almost like it would be like a trail marker that's just like bathrooms this way or something like that. It's very just kind of simple. It's definitely not that yellow sign that we're used to seeing hanging out front of Camp Crystal Lake, but which is fine. But like I think they just needed something that was going to establish where we were, because nothing that we have seen up to this point is telling us that they're in Camp Crystal Lake.
We certainly wouldn't recognize it.
No.
It then cuts to a dinky daytime campfire where 4 people are kind of cooking a little camping meal, sitting around talking, and one of them is basically looks like Elon Musk wearing a varsity jacket. His name is Chad. He's got a friend who is basically thin Nick Frost wearing a terrible Axl Rose wig. That's Sam. And then 2 ladies. One is brunette, and her name is Deborah. The other is blonde, and her name is Cassandra.
I had a hard time getting the names of some of these because, like, I'm not even 100% certain that the stoner's name is Sam. I thought it may be Jed, but I don't know, because like I couldn't find anything about the movie on IMDb, and the actors are just amateur actors. So like I couldn't look them up by face and be like, oh, that's Deborah. Yeah, I was able to piece together some, but like the stoner one, at least for me, was kind of like maybe Sam, maybe Jed, but we can just call him Stoner Dude or Axl Rose or whatever.
Well, I think Jed is the man who now appears, and it's this bearded Crazy Ralph type with what appears to be porridge on his face.
When he shows up, so the first thing is like, this is when you realize like just how English this movie is, because like when you first get to the campsite, it's these 2 girls and 2 guys, and they're having a conversation, and one, the conversation is a little hard to hear because of the audio mix. It's like the music is just a little bit too high, and so I had a hard time hearing them. But also their accents, whatever it is, Scottish, Yorkshire, whatever, it's really hard to interpret what they're talking about. It's a lot of like mumbling, and they're like, and I think it's meant to be just kind of like a mumbled conversation that you're joining midstream, so you don't know. But then this like British version of Crazy Ralph shows up, and like, yeah, he's got this stuff on his face that's like, it's one of the most revolting skin conditions that I've ever seen. And whether it's like porridge or oatmeal, like at one point I thought it was like barnacles, and I'm like, is this some dude from like one of the like the Jack Sparrow movies? Like, who is this dude? But
Barnacle Bill.
Well,
and I
right.
think there's a little bit on his hand too. So I don't know if he's supposed to be like a leper or what, but yeah, this dude is messed up.
Yeah, it's some kind of like skin deformity that I would not want to be anywhere near this guy, because it looks pretty contagious. But I was also thinking like, okay, this is the British version of Crazy Ralph. Like, what would his British name be? And so like I came up with a couple of names. I have Bonkers Oliver. I have I have Mad Nicholas. And then another one I had was this Barnacle Bernard, because I was like, well, that's his skin condition. And then I was assuming this was taking place in like the hills of, like Yorkshire County or whatever. And so I was like, well, he's not like the Yorkshire Ripper, but I'm like, well, he has all this crap on his face, so maybe he's the Yorkshire Dripper.
I mean, all of those are great, but you started strong with Bonkers Oliver. So the reason I think that that's Jed is that Jed was played by J.J. Savaloy, who was also credited as the special makeup effects artist, which I think means he put the porridge on his own face.
He just like cakes it on and just waits for it to dry. And he's like, all right, guys, we're ready. Let's go.
So yeah, he basically Crazy Ralph's the story for everybody. And there was one moment that I really did like, which was Deborah, the brunette girl, kind of cutting in and acting like she knows the story, but she kept referring to Josh Voorhees, which was a cute nod to the fact that Victor Miller, when he originally wrote the story, wanted to call the little boy Josh because there was a kid that he didn't like from his days as in school, who was like a bully or something, and he just always thought that like Josh was the name of a shithead kid. And for whatever reason, they changed it to Jason. But that was just a cute kind of like little, hey, we're fans. We know this stuff.
I just assumed I couldn't understand what she was saying.
After this little session where he basically violates all the laws of personal space to tell the kids the story of Jason, he wanders off into the woods. And I laughed because they basically, instead of day for night, they shot day for cloudy day. It was supposed to be kind of dim and stormy, but it looks like they just kind of cranked the blue filter on the camera or something. And he's got this like sack of empty bottles of liquor clanking at his waist that he's sort of like the drunk caretaker from Part 6. So he's obviously kind of a rummy. And he's carrying his empties, his dead soldiers with him. He randomly comes upon Jason's grave marker. It looks a lot like the one from Part 5, where it's basically like a plank of wood with the name Jason Voorhees scrawled on it with white paint. But it's just in this like kind of spot in a small clearing in the woods, not too far from the campsite.
I do like he kind of spits on it, and then he finds a convenient metal fence post laying directly next to the gravesite. Like, at least in the Part 6 version, the graveyard was surrounded by a metal fence, so you could understand where they were going to get this fence post. But this is like in the middle of the woods. There's nothing around, and there just happens to be this lone fence post right there, which Barnacle or what's his name, Bonkers Oliver rams into the ground. And then because the color grading on the film is blue, we're led to believe that there's a storm coming. So there's like a bolt of lightning, and it sends Bonkers Oliver flying, but then he managed to like, and again, it's like, I have to give them like a little bit of creative freedom here because of their budget, but the gravesite was clearly like Jason was underground. Like he was buried underground. There was no pile of dirt that he was under. He was clearly underground, but this bolt of lightning somehow clears away all of the dirt and completely reveals Jason's body just laying on top of the ground.
Yeah, like it was supposed to blast this hole down to Jason's body, but it's just that the guy playing Jason is laying on the ground and they threw a little bit of dirt on him.
I thought the effects for him were pretty good, though. He was pretty accurate to Part 6 Jason, and like there were some close-ups of his hands, and there was some maggots crawling on it and everything. And the mask wasn't perfect, but it wasn't bad. I'd say my only complaint about this first look of Jason is that he's remarkably well fed, considering he's been buried underground for so long.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I did like that it looked. His body type was a lot like the guy who originally played Jason in Part 6, but got fired after they filmed paintball scene, and he was a little bit pudgy, and that's why they let him go and got C.J. Graham instead.
Yeah.
But this guy, whoever, whichever one of the actors is playing this guy, because they never credited who played Jason, and I think it's actually several of them in different shots. But this guy, he looked a lot like Part 6 Jason.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I agree. The mask of his face, not the hockey mask, but like his unmasked face, looks a lot like the Part 7 design. And I suspect that since this little production company is a prop and mask making place, that they may have made it themselves. And it is pretty good. It's a little bit loose fitting in the back. You can kind of see like the flanges and stuff in certain shots. But overall, I thought, yeah, this is pretty good. Jason is resurrected by lightning, much like he was in the official Part 6, and immediately skewers Porridge Man with the fence post that was laying on the ground. I thought it was interesting that the camera lingered on Bonkers Oliver's sack of empty bottles. That was puzzling to me in the moment.
Right, and we'll get to it in a second. But yeah, I was the same way. It was a strange shot, but it
pays off.
Yeah, it pays off in a little bit. We then cut to two dudes that are marching through the woods, and
I have that. That's exactly what I wrote.
I mean, there's not much else you can say.
Two dudes marching through the woods.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot you can say about these guys, but that will at least one of them will develop over time. But one of the guys has long hair, a goatee. He's wearing a do-rag, and he's got a leather motorcycle jacket and a black Ozzy Osbourne t-shirt. And if you couldn't already tell from that description, this is obviously Tommy Jarvis.
Yeah, it's a very different interpretation of adult Tommy Jarvis. He's a much bigger dude than Tom Matthews was. And yeah, he's just got this like motorcycle guy vibe. I kind of get it. I mean, Tommy was already a little bit of a weird kid with all of his mask making and his interest in horror and stuff like that. So I could see where that little boy would, especially after going through such trauma, would grow up to be sort of a harder edged person than the denim wearing, likable Tom Matthews version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it was a more logical progression from the Part 5 Tommy than it was from the Part 6 Tommy. Because you saw like the angry, mentally disturbed version of Tommy in Part 5, and that, you could see that person growing up into being a loner and being a little bit more rebellious. Whereas the Tom Matthews version, he's got a little bit more charisma, and he's got personality, and he's more kind of buttoned up and knows what his problems are and how to solve them, where this guy seems like a little bit more of a renegade. So I did like that angle of it.
Yeah. He's with his friend Eddie, who is essentially Hawes, the character that Horshack played in Part 6. Just kind of like a nebbishy little sidekick buddy carrying a shovel.
But he looks exactly like Shelley.
Yes, he does look a lot like Shelley. He's got this kind of curly afro type hairstyle, and more of a nebbish than Hawes was. So it's but it's essentially the same dynamic. These two guys have coincidentally chosen today to search for and dig up and destroy Jason's corpse. We did learn earlier that it is in fact Friday the 13th. So I guess it kind of makes sense that they'd be there, but it's funny how all this is happening, this is all happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Eddie finds the body of Bonkers Oliver within easy eye shot of where they had both just been standing. And Tommy is essentially catatonic. He's standing at the way too shallow grave and found the knocked over headstone while he hears audio flashbacks to Part 4.
And it's around this time that we learn why we lingered on that shot of the sack, is because as Eddie panics and runs away after seeing Bonkers Oliver, he doesn't get very far before he gets cornered by a sack-headed Jason, who then crushes Eddie's head.
Yeah. I liked, I'm always happy to see Sack wearing Jason. They've got the one eye hole poked through it, and it's tied off around the neck with a little bit of cord. I wasn't thrilled with how the final result wound up looking, but I was happy to see that they gave it a shot.
My biggest complaint with it was that the sack was just too white and clean. Now that's fine because Oliver had been just carrying it to, carry his bottles of booze or whatever, so it wouldn't necessarily be dirty. But that took away from it. Like a little bit, it looked like it was too laundered and fresh, and so it just kind of, it didn't have the same effect as like the stained sack that Jason wore in part 2.
Yeah. Even though you have to imagine that it smells like scotch or something because it had remnants of alcohol bottles clanking around in it. Ready for revenge, seeing his friend killed by Jason, Tommy drops his backpack, which causes the hockey mask to fall out. And he draws a machete and goes to attack Jason, but it goes about as well as it can be expected. Disarmed, he then punches Jason a few times, which knocks off the sack, and we see Jason's face with what looks like porridge drooping out of his mouth, making me assume he licked Bonkers Oliver's face or something.
Most of the budget for this film is spent on porridge, as we're seeing early on. But the thing that bugged me about this scene is at least I did not notice the sack getting knocked off when Tommy punched Jason in the face. It's an immediate cut where you see, like, Jason has the mask on, or the sack on, Tommy punches him, and then you get a close up of Jason's unmasked face and he's spitting out the porridge. We're like, it was just a little confusing. Like, I felt like there could have been a way where just like a quick shot of him like actually ripping the mask off so he could spit the stuff out of his mouth, or maybe Tommy's the one that ripped the mask off. But it was just like, wait, what? And I even rewound it a couple of times, like, he was wearing a mask 1 second ago. Where did it go?
Yeah, it was a little bit garbled. Jason stands there like an idiot, which gives Tommy time to grab his shit and then take off. So Tommy really did not accomplish what he set out to do there. The hockey mask is left behind, so we then get a remix of the cold open to part 6, where Jason puts it on and then whips around to face camera wearing the hockey mask, and it cuts right into the James Bond style footage from part 6 that they have simply stolen and inserted here. One thing about that I really don't like is that I was reading some of the comments on the YouTube page, and one of the comments was like, "Oh man, that was so awesome! I love that joke you did with the James Bond style thing." So like, some people may think that these filmmakers created that concept and that footage, and that's not really fair.
Right. I also don't feel like this particular production earned it, because at least with part 6, Jason Lives, there was a sense of kind of goofiness to the movie that you could kind of pick up on. So when you saw that, even though it was bizarre to see this like James Bond opening, it kind of was at least fitting in with the tone of the movie so far. And in this one, it's like, they're just doing it because it exists in the movie that they're, remaking. And I just don't feel like they earned it. So it's a little out of place. And I saw the same exact comment on YouTube too. And I just wanted to be like, it wasn't their idea, right?
We then get nearly a full minute of credits, which is a pretty big proportion of a 33-minute film. That's a theme we'll come back to later.
One thing I like about like low budget productions like this is, even though the credits are like a minute long, there's only like 5 names that appear the entire time, because everyone's pulling like quadruple duty. So it's like, this person was the actor, and they also did the catering, and they also did the makeup, and they also were executive producer, and this guy wrote it too. And so it's just a lot of like the same names popping up over and over again. But yeah, it was a surprisingly long credit sequence for a movie that's not very long.
After the credits conclude, we cut to a shot of Tommy running through some landscaped backyards, and he comes across the foursome's campsite. We then get our first of many tent unzips, Tommy interrupts Chad and Deborah as they're sitting inside listening to Alice Cooper like fourth graders at a sleepover. They don't believe any of his rantings about Jason, so he hauls Chad out of the tent, and we get tent unzip number 2, so that the other couple, Sam and Cassandra, can see what's going on.
One thing I like about this scene is that when Tommy opens the first tent, which is Chad and Deborah, who are fully clothed in a zip-up tent in the middle of the day for some reason, but Tommy's just like mumbling some Cockney bullshit about a killer being on the loose, and you could tell like Chad and Deborah are looking at them like they either can't believe what he's saying or they just don't understand what he's saying, because they're just like, what? And he's like, Jason voice, and they're just like, all right. And then once Chad gets out of the tent, he confronts Tommy, and he has my favorite line in the entire movie, and I'll try to deliver it with the same amount of enthusiasm as Chad does, but he's like, I just came out here to relax and get away from the city for a little bit. Would you just fuck off?
Seeing that he is unable to convince them to leave the area, Tommy then disappears into the yard. And we cut to a hunter-type dude with the wacky paintball music from Part 6. This guy seems to have the utility belt with the throwing darts and all that stuff that we saw in the official version of Jason Lives. He sits on a log to rest, and a bush jiggling nearby makes him freak out and pick up his rifle. It's like he's scared, but why wouldn't he think that it's an animal that he's there to hunt?
Mm-hmm. This whole scene kind of bugged me because, like, they're like, it's almost like they had a checklist of scenes that they wanted to include from the movie, but not all of them needed to be included. And I feel like this is one of them, because there's just not a lot that happens. And at least with like the paintball scene in Part 6, there's some humor and there's more than one character. And so you get some funny things that are happening. But here it's just like he shows up on screen and he sits on the log, and then here's the noise, and the whole thing is over in like a minute. So it was just kind of pointless for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it was to give Jason some other stuff to work with, sort of like it was in Part 6, but that was much more fleshed out and done with, like little cute subplots and stuff. This guy just turns around to paw through his gear a little bit, and when he looks back up, Jason is standing there and then spears him through the foot and then through the body with the fence post.
So far, the kill effects have been pretty decent. They're not particularly graphic. You're not seeing a lot of details, but at least so far the kills haven't been like, oh, come on, that's stupid, or that looks terrible. It's like, yeah, it's not a bad job for what they're working with.
Yeah, agreed. We get a really quick and unnecessary scene of Chad and Sam in a tent smoking weed and talking about girls, but we then rejoin Tommy with his unique tough guy strut, who, as he's trucking through the woods, encounters Part 4 Jason. We get some more of the audio flashbacks to, die, as Tommy escapes Jason's grip by stabbing him in the eye with a stick and running away. Jason then goes apeshit on a pile of fallen branches that was not capable of concealing Tommy and was not even in Jason's way. It's just like Jason going to town.
Right. He's just like having a temper tantrum. He's like, I'm going to tear this thing apart. And I know we shouldn't really be scrutinizing a movie like this too much, but there's a lot of illogical things that are starting to happen now. So like you mentioned earlier how Jed and or whatever his name is, the stoner and Chad are smoking weed together in the tent. But like literally, as far as we know, minutes earlier, Chad was in the tent with the girl and Stoner was in the tent with the girl. So like now where are the girls? Like the girls are gone. And where's Tommy going? Because like he tried to warn the kids that Jason was coming, and they didn't understand what he was saying, so he left. And so now he's marching through the woods, just kind of stomping around. But like, is he leaving? Is he looking for Jason? It's not really clear what he's doing. He's clearly on a mission based on the way he's walking, but we just start to get a lot of like people being alone or people being together by convenience rather than by logic.
Right.
Trying to figure out why these people are together, then they're apart, and then they're together again. So I'll try to point those things out. And again, it's nitpicky, but there's just a couple of things where it's like, well, wait, where did they go? Like, just tell me where they went, and just like make it simple for us to be like, okay, fine, they went off to the girls went off to the woods to pee. Fine, that's all I need to know.
Yeah, and it's also difficult to know how much time is passing here. But you're right. It's some of the logistics are getting a little bit garbled. In this instance, I think I know what they're going for because we find out Tommy is hiding, nearby while Jason attacks that fallen tree, and we find out that it's actually just a delusion. This part 4 Jason fades away from view. So Tommy has shed both his motorcycle jacket and his delusions. This is just a vision of Jason. And I think the idea here is that after he couldn't convince the kids that Jason was back, Tommy was just taking off to leave, to get away. And then he has this little delusion/flashback to part 4, which is what he lived through, to sort of convince him that he needs to stay and take care of Jason once and for all, even though Jason is now back. So I get the sense that maybe he's supposed to be like turning around and going, he was going to try and get away, and now he's turning around and going back into the battle.
That makes sense. And I think it lines up too with the part 5 version of Tommy that we saw, where he would like look out the window and think he saw Jason standing out there, and then he would fade away. So like, I didn't have a problem with that. I was very confused at first when Jason showed up because he looked completely different from the Jason that we had seen so far. He was like this like pencil neck dude, completely different outfit. He did have a gash in his mask. So there was a big difference. But the scene where Jason eventually fades away, they're like Tommy and Jason are face to face, and right before Jason starts to fade away, he leans in even closer, like face to face to Tommy, and I swear to God, I thought they were going to kiss. Like that would have been
that would have been a crazy diversion for this series.
But it was weird. Like there's like they're both just staring face to face, and then like Jason leans in a little bit further. I'm like, oh my God, is he going to kiss him? And then he starts to fade away. But
and then the title card changes from Jason Lives Again to Jason Loves Again.
Oh.
The real Jason prunes some trees on his march through the woods, and we cut back to the campsite where Chad and Deborah have clearly just finished smacking mutual meat bags. And after some dialogue that I couldn't understand, we get tent unzip number 3 as she leaves to go for a swim. Chad is left behind on his own, and we get tent unzip number 4 as Jason surges in to grab Chad. Now, it's possibly a continuation of tent unzip number 3, but we never saw Deborah zip it shut. And this shot of Jason starts with it closed. So I think it's maybe another door to the tent, or just Chad had earlier closed it back up and Jason is now unzipping it again. So for the official count, I'm calling it number 4.
So now that Jason has grabbed Chad out of the tent, they have a really short skirmish, and Jason grabs Chad by the head and turns it around 180 degrees. And so that's kind of the end of preppy Chad, who was one of the more confusing characters for me in this movie, because I couldn't tell if he was American doing an English accent or if he was English doing a different English accent. I found his, he has like a Facebook page for his acting profile, and even the profile says like, sometimes I'm American, sometimes I'm English. And I'm like, damn it, he doesn't answer the question. Oh. So I don't know what he is, but he did not fit in with the rest of that group. The girls that he was with didn't seem like they would like a guy like him. He certainly would not be friends with Stoner Dude, but he was an odd one, to say the least.
Yes. The only connection he has to Deborah is that she's also wearing a varsity jacket, so maybe they both play sports in high school, even though they're both like 30. I will say, just for sake of fairness, that before his head was turned around, he was also run through with the machete.
Oh, that's true. Right. another thing that makes this dynamic confusing is I think it's the scene earlier where Chad and Stoner Dude are in the tent together smoking weed, and Chad says something like to Stoner Dude, he's like, "Aren't you bummed that you can't fuck Cassandra?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I don't need a tent to imagine fucking her," or something like that. So it's like, okay, fine, they're platonic friends, and they're sharing a tent together on a camping trip, but it's just weird where it's like, well, if he is interested in her, why didn't we ever see any of that dynamic? Like, why is it meant to be some secret thing? But it was just a weird. So it's like, okay, so Stoner Dude and Cassandra are not romantically involved, but they're sharing a tent together, which is fine. And then Chad and Deborah, who apparently are involved, are sharing a tent together, but none of them fit together. Like, they don't feel like any of these people would be hanging out.
Yeah, and I mean, I could probably understand their group dynamic if I could understand the words they were saying, but in most cases I couldn't. So
it's I will say that I was like, maybe, I know exactly what it was. It was during that opening shot where they're around the campfire, which if you look closely, they're clearly sitting on a park bench. Like, they're not at a campsite. Like, they're in a park, but they I couldn't understand what they were saying. And I went on YouTube to see if I could figure out how to turn on the captions, and there was no captions available. I'm like, damn it. Because that would have been helpful, because later on, there were many scenes where I'm like, what are they saying? Like, they could be giving away some really integral details about this plot, and I'm just not picking up on it.
I think the problem is that whoever captions things for YouTube couldn't understand them either. So they just didn't even bother to include them.
It just is like in parentheses, like in an unintelligible garble. Yorkshire nonsense.
Another possible name for Bonkers Oliver.
Yeah.
We get a cute little nod to part 8 when Jason kicks the radio that's been playing an Alice Cooper song. So yeah, that made me laugh. Nearby, Tommy has sorted through his pile of shit and trades out the motorcycle jacket for a fur-lined denim jacket like he wore in part 6. Was
that his pile of shit? Because it wasn't clear what he was digging through. Because at first I thought it was Eddie, like the Shelley dude that he was with early on that got killed. I thought maybe he had a bag that he dropped and he found it. And then I went back and it doesn't look like Eddie's carrying a bag, and he definitely wasn't wearing the fur-lined denim coat. And Tommy was carrying like a garbage bag or something of stuff, and it looked like there was a machete in there, and we know that the hockey mask was in there. But do you just think, and we don't have an answer, so I'm just asking your opinion, but do you just think that it was his bag of stuff and he just happened to bring a secondary jacket?
Yes, because if I'm remembering correctly, Tommy did not have a machete after Jason was initially resurrected. He ran off without it. Now he's gone back to get it and get anything else from his equipment that he might use, which turns out to be the jacket.
Okay. So the logic being is that Tommy was going into the woods to presumably kill Jason once and for all. And in addition to his leather motorcycle jacket, he also decided to bring a fur-lined denim jacket just in case
Correct.
He gets chilly.
Exactly.
Okay. That's fine. I'll buy it.
We then get tent unzip number 5 as Stoner Sam staggers out to see what Chad and Deborah were up to. We get a jump scare where he's startled by Cassandra, who then leaves to go look for Deborah because she thinks she went swimming. We then get tent zip number 6 as Sam goes back in for another smoke while Jason watches from the weeds nearby. There's a cool shot from inside the tent of Jason walking past a little transparent window in the tent, and I wanted to ask you, would you want a tent with a window, or would you want to not see what's going on outside?
Good question. I don't know. I think it would depend this is making things a little bit too complicated, but it would depend which direction my tent was facing. So if let's say one part of the tent was like right on the edge of like an overlook over a lake or something where there was no chance that someone could be behind that portion of the tent, then I would want like an open window where I could like see the stars or see the lake or something. But if it was like if there was a path that people could walk around like all four sides of the tent, then no, I probably would not want a window because I would see something move past or like a shadow or something, and it would just, yeah, probably too much information for me.
Yeah, I don't think I would want anybody to be able to peer in and see what I was doing or sleeping or whatever. There is some trepidation about not being able to see what's going on outside around me, but yeah, I don't think I would want a window. Jason's clumsy stick snapping causes tent unzip number 7 as Sam pokes his head out, thinking he'll find Chad. No, it's Jason. He offers J-Man a hit on his bong, which Jason grabs and then rams up through Sam's chin. It was a pretty good kill, but I was sure blood was going to shoot out of the bowl, and it didn't.
That's true. Yeah, like it would have, right? Yeah, like the bong would have just like the volume of it would have just filled with blood, like that would have been cool. Like, but yeah, it didn't. It was a little anticlimactic.
Here's another moment that doesn't make a whole lot of sense logistically. Cassandra has found Deborah, and they're walking through the woods together. But after a quick check-in with Tommy, we next see Deborah completely alone, going for what appears to be a really shallow, disgusting swim in the pond. I was happy to see that she was wearing aqua shoes, however.
Yeah, I definitely had questions about, like, where did Cassandra go? Like, they were just together, and there was no point in their conversation where Cassandra's like, hey, I'm going to head back to the camp while you go swimming. It's like they're just suddenly apart. But I also noticed how shallow that pond was in, because like it's almost like she's trying to make it seem like she's in deep water by basically just either walking on her knees or she's just like staying really low to like make sure that the water is over her shoulders. But like there's one point where she gets up and like you can tell like she just stands up and she's in like ankle deep water. So she's not really swimming.
Jason is watching all of this in plain sight, but Deborah emerges unscathed. And it made me laugh because you can see several homes in the background nearby.
I didn't notice that, but there was one scene earlier on, and I don't remember which one it was, but it was a lake shot, and I saw a couple of cars driving by on the other side of the lake. I'm like, just wave them down. Like you're fine.
Deborah makes it all the way back to camp, where Jason is already waiting, again in plain sight. We get tent unzip number 8 as Deborah climbs in, and tent zip number 9 as she shuts to get cozy. Jason shakes the shit out of the tent, but she just thinks it's Chad playing a prank. Not wasting any time with a zipper this time, Jason tears his way in, grabs her sleeping bag, and boom, whomps her against a big tree nearby 6 times.
We've discussed the sleeping bag kill in previous seasons. For me, like the final cut that we see in part 7 is one swing, and it does the damage and that's it. But the original cut had numerous swings, and then like the MPA had to cut it out for violence. And I think we were both in agreement that the one hit is more effective because it's more brutal. But I have to say that I didn't mind the 6 swings with this one because it looked real. Like the person swinging the sleeping bag, whatever's in the sleeping bag, is clearly heavy because this person's really struggling to kind of like grasp it.
That made me laugh.
Yeah, they're like, because they have to like kind of recalibrate and get a better grip and swing again, and then they like got to get a better grip and swing again. So like there's some, it feels real, and it also was, I thought, very effective. It looked like a genuine person in a sleeping bag, and there was at least 2 or 3 of the hits against the tree. There's really effective blood spatter that comes out of the bag and onto the tree, and that's not like CGI or anything. Like there's some sort of bladder or something inside that's breaking and shooting this blood out. So like that's really cool. So overall, I thought the kill was really well done.
Yeah, I totally agree. I along with you, I always preferred the single hit from part 7 compared to the behind the scenes, version where you see more hits and it just didn't work the same. But I thought this worked really well, and I did like the multiple hits in this instance, and I thought that they shot it pretty well. So this was a good version. Cassandra returns to the campsite from taking a shit or whatever she was doing. And we get tent unzip number 10 and number 11 as she zips and unzips to go in and change clothes. And then we get tent unzip number 12 as she comes out because she's gotten bored and or lonely. She finds Deborah's body and then sees Jason standing right there where she would have seen him moments ago had she turned her head. A low-speed jog pursuit begins.
You've obviously been pointing this out as we've been talking, but I do wonder the point of going in and out of the tents so much, like from a filmmaker standpoint, because it's not really giving us a different location, because most of the times it's like they're in the tent for 2 seconds and then they're coming out. So it's not like we're just getting a different vantage point, but like these people are doing nothing outside of the tent. Like the only time we really see them congregating outside of their tents is at the very beginning at that like campfire scene. And then it's like, I mean, obviously the, Chad and Deborah are having sex inside the tent. So like that makes sense. But like, why is Stoner Dude and Chad inside the tent smoking pot? Like they're in the woods. Like there's no one around. I mean, other than Bonkers Oliver that showed up, but and Tommy, but like there's not enough people to justify like they couldn't just be sitting outside smoking weed or whatever. It's like every single conversation that they're having, everything that they're doing is taking place inside of tents. And I think the only reason is because it creates a reveal where it's like, I can unzip the tent and suddenly Jason's there, or I can unzip the tent and it's not Jason, it's actually Tommy. So it just creates a little bit of mystery, but it got to the point where it started to feel like the scenes in part 7 where it was like, they're in the house, they're out of the house, they're in the house, they're out of the house. It's like, why are you, why just stay in one place? Like, I don't care if you're sitting around the fire at the same time or the whole time, or whether you're in the tent the whole time, but just like this back and forth is just driving me crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it was getting to the point, it was so humorous that I did start counting them. And it felt almost like somebody had given them these tents as a favor, and they were almost like, showing off like, look, we're using your tents in the movie. Look how much the tents are so important. Almost like advertising or something.
I don't remember which tent unzip it is, but I'm almost certain that it's Jason doing the unzipping, but you can tell like the scene starts and you could see that they wanted to do like one swoop because it's kind of like a half circle zipper. And the intention was that the shot was going to be Jason was going to grab the zipper at the bottom and zip it all the way around to the top, and it clearly gets stuck like maybe a third of the way to the top, and there's a really, really quick cut that is almost the same angle but not exactly the same angle. It's just enough to see that it's different, where they just continue the zip. So it's like zip, pause, zip, and they just cut it to make it look like it's one continuous one. So it's like they're really determined to show these unzippings.
They should have called this movie Jason Zips again. Stoner Sam's body falls out of a tree randomly in her path, just like we often get in these movies. Did Jason set that as a trap, purposefully, or was it just coincidence? But yeah, that made me laugh. She runs through a few more yards with Jason in pursuit, and this time it's clearly the actor who plays Tommy as Jason, because you can tell from his posture, from that kind of tough guy swagger that Tommy has, that he's now wearing the Jason costume.
Oh, interesting. I didn't pick up on that.
Jason misses a strike with the machete as Cassandra climbs over a fence. And then it made me laugh. Jason has to climb over the fence himself because they couldn't destroy the fence. The pursuit has now reached the lake, so Cassandra wades in, and Jason's feet break the 180-degree rule as he goes in after her.
Cassandra makes it out into the lake, and she's basically treading water, and Jason has now completely submerged himself in the lake. And Tommy hilariously has this very calm conversation with Cassandra. So again, Cassandra's treading water out in the lake. Jason is out of sight underwater. And Tommy goes, "Hey, what's your name?" And she's like, And she's like, Cassandra. And he's like, okay, he's directly underneath you. So I'm going to need you to swim to me. Like he's giving her these like detailed directions while Jason's just underwater somewhere. We have no idea where he is. And Tommy's like literally standing on the lakeshore with his machete, like motioning to Cassandra, like which direction to go. Like she can't discover which way the shore of the lake is. And he's like, yeah, this way, this way. And just as Cassandra makes it to shore, Jason jumps out of the water in kind of like one of those famous, like Jason jumping out of the water scenes, and grabs Tommy, and the two of them start to get into a scuffle.
Yeah, there are a couple of details about this that made me laugh. One is that Cassandra is swimming in water that is so shallow, there's not enough room for her to kick or paddle effectively, so she's moving very, very slowly. And then, yeah, like you say, Tommy directs her to swim left and towards him, which she does, and then simply stands up and runs the rest of the way.
Right.
And after Jason has erupted from the water and tackles Tommy, they're clearly in water only up to their shins, meaning it wasn't deep enough for Jason to have been submerged.
Yeah, I think the way that they like framed that shot was like they framed it much higher, so it's like, well, we'll just shoot from like Tommy's shoulders up, and then
Right.
like Jason will just like crouching down behind, like underneath, out of frame, and then he's just gonna be like boop, and he's gonna pop up behind.
Yeah. There's a lot of machete swings and misses, a lot of punching and shoving, and a lot of wind being picked up on Mike.
It's more of a like a very slow bar brawl than an actual fight. It's just kind of like a lot of like pushing and swings and misses, and it's not the most fast paced of choreography.
Yeah, it's not like a savage battle to the death here. Although Tommy does hit the ground and goes in for a nut kick at one point. So Jason grabs his head and starts to squeeze. Cassandra, who's been standing nearby watching instead of hauling ass out of there, picks up a rock and hurls it at Jason's noggin. He drops Tommy, who recovers enough to then cold cock Jason with that same rock and beat him to a pulp. I counted roughly 26 hits.
Mm-hmm. And it's definitely like an homage to part 4, because you even hear like faintly in the background that die, die, die.
Right.
Tommy. Yeah, so it's just like him, Corey Feldman swinging the machete over and over again. But it was surprisingly brutal, and it makes sense. We know what Tommy's story is, and he was there to kill Jason, so he had his shot and he took it. But yeah, it was pretty brutal.
Yeah. And good sound design, like the thumps were really convincing. And I thought it was, it was a reasonable way to show Jason getting defeated. Now victorious, Tommy throws the hockey mask in the water where it sinks 1 inch and then stops.
Because that's as deep as the lake is.
Yeah, exactly. They roll Jason's body down into the water and then move the camera to make it look like he's floating away, even though he's clearly just resting on the shallow bottom. Tommy and Cassandra limp off as Jason's mask drifts in the water. And then we get the slowest moving end credits I've ever seen, which, as you pointed out, is hilarious because it's the same 4 names over and over. But they moved so slowly.
Well, they tricked me a couple of times too, because most of the time it's just kind of like a black background, and then other times it would kind of like fade in and show some footage, and you're like, well, wait, is this like a post-credit sequence, or what are we looking at here? But it was like, no, it's just a random shot of Cassandra or Deborah, whoever it was, walking into the lake in her bathing suit. And then it's like, and then here's another random shot of Jason's mask floating in the lake. And so like some of those shots made sense, but it was like I kept waiting for something new to be revealed, but in reality it was just kind of like a recap of today's events.
And I don't really have much to talk about in the credits because, no one's going to know who any of these people are. But the one person who was not shown in the movie that we know of is the guy who produced it and wrote and directed it, Sean McKean. Unless he was perhaps playing Jason in certain shots. Everyone else was involved on multiple levels, but they were all on camera. So, I just wanted to shout him out because he's the mastermind of this whole thing.
So I had a note because there was also the opening credit sequence where we got to see a lot of the cast members and production crew and everything. And I saw Sean McKean's name pop up numerous times. And so this is obviously before the movie had begun. And I was wondering, because in these low budget movies, you get people that are pulling, triple, quadruple duty on things. So I was like, well, Sean McKean's clearly in this movie. So like, who is he? And so it turns out that he's not, as far as we know. And like you said, maybe he played Jason. We don't know, but I couldn't find anything that showed that he played any particular characters, but I didn't realize that until the very end. But as I was watching it, I was like, okay, so when you got a guy that's wearing this many hats, you have to think that he's going to be playing the badass in the movie, because like, of course you're going to cast yourself as that person. Mm-hmm. And so for a long time, I just assumed that Tommy was Sean McKean. So like at the very beginning, I thought it was the preppy dude, Chad, because I was like, this guy looks like a film school dude. He looks like someone that is into film production and all that stuff. So I was like, and he was so out of place for the rest of the characters. I was like, that's got to be Sean McKean. And it turns out that
not. Was my guess.
And so then my next guess was it was Tommy, because it's like, there's so many deliberate, like, I'm a badass strutting through the woods. I'm the one that's going to take down Jason. I'm the one that has the machete. And I'm like, well, that could also be the role that he would cast himself in. But again, as far as we know, he didn't play anybody. Probably Jason, because we didn't really get a full accreditation to who played Jason. But I was actually surprised that they apparently were not starring in the movie.
Mm-hmm. And then, after the credits conclude, we get a strange post-credits sting featuring Freddy Krueger, but I didn't care.
No, and I ended up going on Sajo Productions or whatever, YouTube page, and it looks like they've done a lot of horror remakes, like they've done something for Texas Chainsaw and
Scream,
right? And so obviously this movie came out in, I think, September of 2019. So I haven't kept tabs to see if this Nightmare on Elm Street one ever came out, but I can't blame them if they're horror film buffs and they want to do remakes of some of their favorite films with their friends in a low budget. Like, cool, happy for you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and they were smart to throw a little teaser at the end like that. I mean, that's great self-marketing, but since it's Freddy, I just was like whatever, click.
Although one piece of advice that I do have for Sean McKean is that you need to spell cinematography correctly in the credits, because you spelled it Grophy in the credits.
Cinematography.
Yeah. That's the Yorkshire version, I guess. But yeah, like I hinted at the beginning of this conversation, like I was a little worried 5 minutes in. I was like, oh boy, what is this? But I ended up enjoying it. It doesn't take itself too seriously. No one is trying to, do their best Orson Welles impression or anything like that. These are clearly just friends or just people that happen to be around. That were like, yeah, let's spend a weekend doing this like tribute to a Friday the 13th movie we liked. And so there was a certain just element of charm to it. I think the thick English accents made it a little bit more fun. If this was a bunch of like American guys, I don't know if I would have had as much patience, but it was just nice to see kind of like Friday the 13th through a slightly different lens than we've seen it before.
Yeah, and that's actually dovetails with something that's really pleased me that I've learned since we've started our show. I never thought that Friday the 13th movies would have any legs outside of a very specific slice of the United States, but we've got people who listen to our show all over the world, the UK, Australia, South America. And so Jason is clearly much more multinational than I expected. And this is proof of that. I mean, these people are obviously on the other side of the pond from the United States making this fan film. And that's cool. I think that's awesome that Jason can make an impression all over the place. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this well enough. I'm glad it was only 33 minutes long. I wound up watching it twice, once cold and then once to take notes, and it was fun to go back and see how many tent unzips there were. And it's not necessarily something that I see myself watching again in the future, but I am glad that we talked about it for our show. And, as silly as some of it was, I think they did a decent job with what they had to work with.
I agree. Yeah. And the whole like English kind of angle to it. No, I mean, other than the accents, they really didn't do anything different. But it does make me wonder, because you had mentioned like how far like Jason's footprint kind of spreads across the world. It makes me wonder, or actually, I'm surprised that there haven't been more different interpretations of the film. So if you think of like the Paranormal Activity movies, like after they did 3 or 4 of the American versions, they did like a Hispanic version where it was just it is like just kind of takes place in that culture with those types of characters. And I think there's even a Japanese version that's kind of a remake of the first 2 in one movie. That's very, I know it's very hard to find, but I've heard that's out there. And I'm like, oh, that'd be interesting to see how like different cultures would translate a story like Friday the 13th, because like obviously campgrounds in England or South America or whatever it would be are going to be quite different than a campground in New Jersey. And so can you use that terrain to your advantage, or can you use the cultural reactions to things and like how people camp, or what's their first inclination? Is their first inclination to fight, or is it to run? Like, like every culture is going to have like different responses to things. And it'd be interesting if down the road, whenever we finally do get a Friday the 13th movie, if you do start to see different versions of that, like what would a Japanese Friday the 13th movie look like? I think most people would be open to that. And I'm not saying like, I don't even know like how they would be different, but it would just be interesting if they ever decided to take an approach like that, where it's like, what if it was in rural England and you couldn't understand a single word people were saying to you? Like, how would you know how to get away, and why would you respond? Or like,
or it was in a Latino country and his name is Jason.
Right. So, yeah, overall, I mean, it wasn't, I absolutely agree. The fact that it was like 33 minutes or whatever helped. If this was like an hour and a half of this type of stuff, I don't know if I would have had as much patience, but so I will applaud the filmmakers in having a little restraint and understanding like, hey, we can tackle this pretty quickly. And, it's pretty tight. It moves pretty quickly. Not a lot of it makes sense, but it moves pretty quickly. And, yeah, I don't know if I'd watch it again, but I certainly don't regret watching it. And I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it.
Yeah. If it had been longer, they would have had to get a deeper lake.
Right.
So the final death count is 7, if I counted correctly, which pales in comparison to the number of zippers we saw.
So we have compiled a list of about a dozen fan films that we're going to be getting to. We don't know the schedule, but I think realistically, at least once a month, we'll probably start cranking these out. Some of them are 2-parters, so those will be fun to kind of revisit the second parts later on. But so far, so good. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, and we talked about doing them in release order, for thinking that perhaps fan films may inform each other, or at least be responding to something else going on in the world. And so it'd be interesting if we kind of covered them chronologically in release order. What's the next one coming up?
We were thinking of, it's called Here Comes the Night. That is a 2-parter. So the first one came out in 2019 and the second one came out in 2021. And like you said, wisely, that it would be good to not do those back to back, because it would be fun to see, because there's like 4 or 5 other fan films that we're going to cover between part 1 and part 2, or at least between when those were released, and be like, how are they responding to each other? Are they, like you said, informing each other in terms of narrative or cinematic style or things like that? So there'll be a gap between those 2 parts, but Here Comes the Night is the next one, and that one's even shorter. That one's only like 20 minutes. So
Oh, sweet.
it'll be it'll be interesting to see how people can pull something off like that in a short period of time.
And it was made by Liverpudlians. So
Yeah. Lots of Beatles songs that are, completely authorized. Så to find out how to get med den forsimpelgør, og lære med Jason Voorhees, just live there. You're all doomed.